In this video, I'm going to help you become a better wedge player. It's an area of the game, if we improve it, we're going to see our scores tumbling down. I'm going to give you 3 things I want you to do. So let's take a look at the first thing. So the first thing we need to discuss is just wedge setup. I'm going to be using my 50 degree for this, and we're going to talk about the full wedge swing, and then we're going to talk about smaller wedge shots as well. And I'm also going to give you a little drill / feeling of how you're going to hit some wedge shots, because I think a lot of the times we see a lot of duff shots with wedges. We see really big divots or we see very thin golf shots, and we're going to fix that in the second part of this tip. But firstly, the wedge setup. How do we do it? I see some weird and wonderful things when I'm giving lessons, and when we get to wedges I see some very wonderful things. I think a lot of the time when we have a wedge problem, it's going to be, like I said a minute ago, fats and thins. So we start to think, well, if I put the ball further back in my stance, I'm going to come down steep on it, I'm going to trap that golf ball, and I'm going to get a good strike on it. Unfortunately, that's not the answer to our problems, because if we do end up looking something like this, where the ball's really back of the stance and the hands are too far forwards, unless you catch it perfect, it's not going to be a good shot at all. And also, look how little loft's on that golf club now. I've turned my 50 degree club into something like a 5-iron because I've got it so pressed forward. So we want to try and actually use the loft that we've got on our golf club when we get it out of the bag, so we can get some nice high shots. So a couple of things I want you to tick off as you're going through your wedge setup. Number 1, ball placement. Got the cane on the floor here. We've got a line going up my body there. What we want to try and see is that that ball would be directly underneath my sternum, so in the middle of my body. We can see now that the ball is placed right slap bang in the middle of my stance. I've adopted a slightly smaller stance than I would do with maybe, let's say, a mid-iron, because I'm not trying to generate as much power as I would do with maybe my mid-irons, my long irons and my woods. When we're hitting wedges, it's a little bit more about controlling distance and controlling flight, because we're trying to get it close. So an ever so slightly smaller stance than a mid-iron. We're going to see that the ball now is sat directly below my sternum here. From there then, when I place my club in, I don't want to really excessively lean that grip forwards, because again, I'm taking all the loft off, and what I'm also doing is bringing the leading edge of the golf club into play, and they're quite sharp. It's going to start to dig the ground if we want to. So once we've got stood, we're just going to have the grip now just lent in front of that line ever so slightly there, so we would see my hands are ever so slightly pressed. And then the third and final thing I want you to tick off: don't be pushing your weight behind the line thinking you're going to help the golf ball up into the sky. There's loads of loft on your wedges. They're going to do it. You get the contact, they'll do the job of getting it up in the air for you. So as I address my wedge, what I tend to try and feel is that I have about 55–60% of my weight in my lead side for a full swing. If I was making maybe a half swing or some pitches closer to the green, I would increase this maybe up to about 70%. So we've got a good setup there. We've got ball in the middle, we've got the hands ever so slightly pressed, and from there then that tiny little press into that lead side, and from there then we should be able to hit a nice little wedge. And that's a pretty decent one. And if you just come and have a look here for me for 1 second, you can just see the little graze of divot that I've made there. I've not took out a massive slab of turf. And that is because I try and do one thing when I'm hitting wedges to make sure I'm getting a pretty decent contact. Guys, before we get into the second tip though, what I want you to do, if you're enjoying this lesson and they are helping you, hit the subscribe button down below there for me. It's totally free to do. And also leave us a little comment in the box below. What are you struggling with in your game? And we shall feature it in one of our future lessons. Let's get into the next tip. Tip number 2 to help you hit better wedges. I would imagine you've all got one of these. You might even be watching me on it right now. A phone. Look how thin that is. And that's what I want you to try and feel your divot is going to be like. Like I said earlier, a lot of people almost try digging the golf ball out of the ground as we go through. What I want you to do, if you come in close for me here, I want you to place your phone in line with your golf ball there, so we can see the back of the golf ball is now in line with the back edge of my phone. Like I said a minute ago, very, very thin. You're going to take your golf ball away. From here then, I want you to make some practice swings where once we've adopted that good swing, we're just going to try and feel now that we're brushing about the same width as the phone here, or the same length, and also the same depth. If you imagined you were going to dig it out, you'll be going down and removing that phone. You're not actually swinging on top of it, you're just swinging near it. And I just want you to imagine this bottom part of the golf club here, the sole of it, sort of just brushes and sweeps along there. And just, if you come in close for me here and just have a look at what's happening down near where the phone is, as I'm making these swings with my good setup and starting to feel that, I'm not taking a huge divot, I'm just actually brushing each time and coming even closer here. Look where my divot line started there. So it starts right in line with the edge of the phone, and I've got this little graze as I'm going through. I'm not getting those massive horrible divots or thin strikes. Once you're confident with it, ball back in, aligned up to the edge of the phone there. Just give yourself a little bit more room if you are nervous. We're going to adopt that good stance that we talked about a moment ago, and I want you to just try and get that feeling. You're not digging, you're going to be sweeping or brushing just the length of your phone. So from there then we'll start to see that you actually get better strikes and cleaner contacts. That is an absolute beauty. Come here and have a look for me. Not a massive one, just that shallow little divot as we're going through there. We can see where the divot started. There was my phone. So instead of just sitting on Instagram all the time, use your phone for something useful. Put it down and start doing that. And even if you're at the driving range, you can do that. It's all about just starting to control where the bottom of the club is going. Let's take a look at the third and final thing that is going to help you control how far you hit each wedge. So one of our problems is probably controlling distance when we get into the half swing, the 3/4 swing, and those ones where they're not quite full swings. We sort of end up having a bit of a guessing game. Really easy though, I want you to use my 1, 2, 3 method. And what I mean by that is 1, 2 and 3 are all positions that you're going to swing the golf club to. Now you can choose whether it's where the golf club head swings to, or I do it where my hands swing to, so they all relate to certain parts of my body. You could use a clock face to do this, but I think for someone who's maybe a higher handicap or a beginner, if you've just got 1, 2 and 3 and then you're full as your fourth, it's a little bit easier to manage and you can start to work in and then play around with it. So really simple. We had our full setup for our full swing. If we start at point number 1, I would go ever so slightly in, so I'll go about an inch in here with both feet. From there then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt that same posture. I'm going to lean towards that target, but what I like to do, my number 1 point for me, is when my hands swing level with my belt and the club sort of gets somewhere around horizontal here. So from there then I would start to hit some shots and I would swing through and I would let it go just a little bit further. And what I would notice for my 50-degree wedge that I have here, it goes 125 when I hit a full shot. When I go to point number 3, it comes down, number 2, it comes down, and when I get down to point number 1, making my number 1 swing here, this club will actually fly about 50 yards through the air. So from there then, all I need to do is swing back to 1, carry on through and let it go. It does take some time down at the driving range or down at the practice ground, just working on it. And what I would suggest is having maybe a camera set up like this, so you can get an idea roughly of where you're swinging to. And then if you've got top tracer or a watch or a laser, you're able then to actually measure how far these balls are going. So really simple, that smaller setup. Point number 1 would be to where my belt roughly is. Point number 2 then, I would just go a little bit further and see that my hands are somewhere around my chest, and I see that I've got a little bit of hinge in the wrist and the club's almost pointing up now. If you were using the club head, I would say that this one would probably be level with somewhere around about your shoulder. And then third and finally, my point number 3 is where I feel my hands have swung up to my shoulder. Every follow through that I have just goes a little bit further on because of the momentum and the speed that I'm carrying into the shot. So we'll go for a number 2, and with this one it goes about 75 yards for me. But all I do, get those points and work on them, lock them in. It'll take you maybe a month as you're getting used to it to actually get dialed in, but the more you can do it, what it then gives you is something where you can know distances and not have a guessing game. So slightly smaller setup, ball still in the middle, weight forwards, swing to point number 2, still a nice crisp little strike with my phone drill, and I've got that ball there traveling out about 70 yards for me. The 1, 2, 3 method, belt height, chest height, shoulder height, Get those hands swinging to each point as you're going through, and we'll start to see that you're not guessing as you're going through with those wedges. As I said earlier, I hope this lesson has helped you, and I want you to become a free subscriber. Hit it down there, let us know what you're struggling with, and we'll see you in your next lesson.